urgent. Russia has suffered the loss of 2 military aircraft in a single day. New explosive details are surfacing. Equipment worth millions has been reduced to nothing but twisted scrap metal. Russia is facing growing internal chaos. A digital blackout is spreading, leaving cities in paralysis. Social media is erupting. TikTok is flooded with calls for protest, with the Scarlet Swan movement rapidly gaining traction among young people across the country. The mood is shifting fast and discontent is spreading beyond control. But inside Russia, the response remains the same: mass detentions. Total meltdown at the top. Moscow can no longer sustain its so-called special operation, and now the president is passing the hat among billionaires, desperately asking them to fund the war. Is this the end of Putin's regime? Let's talk about it. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. Maria Farafonova here with the latest updates. Russians lost 2 military aircraft in a single day. On March 31st, Russia lost contact with 2 of its military planes at once, an An-26 and a Su-34. Communication with the An-26 was lost over Crimea. This was reported by the Russian Ministry of Defense. According to Russian media, the aircraft allegedly crashed into a cliff. However, it cannot be ruled out that the Russian plane was shot down by Russia's own air defense systems. Fighter Bomber reports that the aircraft was carrying around 30 Russian military personnel. 7 crew members and 23 passengers didn't make it, as the Russian Ministry of Defense admitted for the first time. The second lost Russian aircraft is the Su-34 fighter bomber. The circumstances of its destruction have not been officially commented on. It was likely lost during a combat mission involving guided aerial bombs. The crew also perished. The An-26 military transport aircraft that crashed in Crimea likely took off from the Belbek military airfield. This was stated by military expert and former spokesperson of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Vladislav Seleznov.
This happened near the Belbek Valley. Crimean residents know well that this is essentially a suburb of Sevastopol. We will learn more details later, but this is very important. Because when the enemy actively uses its aviation component, it must understand that its resource potential is being depleted, and often it simply falls.
Russia is slipping into a digital blackout reality, and public anger is boiling over. Russia seems to be sliding into a new technological dark age where modern communications is gradually replaced by broken systems, disappearing connectivity, and a growing sense of digital isolation. While state media continues to broadcast triumphs and stability, ordinary citizens are experiencing something very different. The internet has turned into an empty icon on their screens. For many, this has become more than inconvenience. It feels like being stripped of basic modern rights. People report paying for services they cannot use, while everyday tasks like ordering food, making payments, or accessing essential apps are turning into exhausting, sometimes impossible missions. What was once a connected society is increasingly slipping into confusion and frustration. But patience is running out. A wave of youth-led anger is beginning to surface across Russia. On TikTok alone, thousands of videos have appeared calling for protests against internet restrictions under the banner of the Scarlet Swan movement. Reports suggest planned demonstrations in dozens of cities and regions, demanding the restoration of basic digital freedom. Authorities, however, have responded in a familiar way, not with dialogue, but with preemptive detentions.
In Moscow, students Maxim Kayfets and Nikita Ulanov were arrested for 15 days for participating in an unauthorized protest against internet blocking on Bolotnaya Square. Moscow students Maxim Kayfets and Nikita Ulanov, who were arrested for 15 days on charges of disobeying police, were found to be members of the Scarlet Swan movement. This was reported by Verstka, citing other members of the movement. Kayfets was listed as one of the organizers in the notice for the rally on Sakharov Avenue. He is 18 years old. Ulanov is a volunteer for the Scarlet Swan.
The scale of discontent is spreading rapidly, from Vladivostok in the far east to Rostov-on-Don in the south. Across the country, authorities are reportedly scrambling to prevent gatherings, offering increasingly thin justifications for restrictions.
Why can't protests against lockdowns be held in Russian cities? Authorities' theories: Moscow and the Moscow region. Mass events are prohibited due to COVID-19. Barnaul and Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky. The rally's purpose violates the principle of legality because Roskomnadzor is blocking the internet within the scope of its legal authority. Kazan. The wording of the goal allows for arbitrary and ambiguous interpretation. Volgograd. There is a threat of drone attack. Voronezh. There is a threat of terrorist attacks. Tomsk. All 15 sites offered for the promotion are occupied. Vladivostok. The event can only be held at one site, but it needs repairs.
Russia's so-called digital cage is starting to show cracks, and for the authorities, the growing unrest may signal the beginning of a much deeper and more unpredictable challenge. Putin is squeezing money out of businessmen for the war. This was reported by The Bell. The meeting between Vladimir Putin and business leaders took place after the Congress of the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs. According to sources, Putin discussed continuing the war and its financing with oligarchs. He said, "We will keep fighting and we will go to the borders of Donbass," after which he proposed that businessmen make voluntary contributions to the budget. One source said the idea to tap business in difficult times came from Igor Sechin, who outlined it in a letter to Putin. Some businessmen responded immediately. So is the situation really that bad? Are these the final moves before collapse? Drone attacks on key terminals in Primorsk and Ust-Luga have led to a sharp drop in Russian energy exports, Bloomberg reports. Export revenues fell by more than $1 billion in a week. Average daily oil shipments dropped to 2.32 million barrels per day, the lowest level since the beginning of 2025. How Ukrainian deep strike operations are draining the Kremlin's economy, watching the report.
Drones have struck the Russian oil port of Ust-Luga for the fifth time in the past 10 days, Reuters reports. On the morning of March 31st, the governor of the Leningrad region, Alexander Drozdenko, reported damage at the port. Ust-Luga is referred to as the Baltic Gateway of Russia. This is the largest Russian port through which significant volumes of crude oil and petroleum products are exported, including by using vessels from the Shadow Fleet. The attacks on Ust-Luga result in direct losses for Russia in foreign currency earnings.
These mysterious and supposedly friendly drones that made their way into the Leningrad region with surprising speed effectively brought a sudden and definitive end to all the lingering hopes of generating quick and easy profits. This includes the expectations that were closely tied to the previously announced potential reduction or the complete removal of specific trade restrictions and sanctions implemented by Donald Trump. Those very same restrictions that he had supposedly imposed on the export and supply of various Russian raw materials destined for the Indian market. So now, as we look at the current market trends, the projected increase in total oil and gas revenues will actually turn out to be significantly smaller than what was previously anticipated by most experts.
As a result of Ukrainian strikes on the infrastructure and logistics facilities of the aggressor country, the Kremlin has already lost up to 45% of its oil exports and nearly 40% of its monthly missile production volume, according to calculations by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine.
Russia is waging an ideological war against Ukraine. The Putin regime is pursuing exclusively imperial ideological goals. Accordingly, the simple scenarios that some call mutual concessions, supposedly capable of bringing peace in an instant, are part of the fog of war and lies. Russia's clear goal today is to continue its aggression, and this goal will only change when it starts to run out of resources. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The long-range sanctions imposed by Ukraine's defense forces are directly hitting the Kremlin's key sources of income. A record budget deficit, runaway inflation, and systemic problems in virtually every sector of the economy are the reality that can no longer be ignored. Moscow saw the escalation in the Middle East as an opportunity. The president of Ukraine is confident. The leaders of the countries in the region, unlike the Russian dictator, are not interested in a prolonged confrontation.
As of today, I am convinced that Russia is interested in a prolonged war. It benefits from this. The United States is focused on the Middle East, which means a reduction in military support for Ukraine. In addition, sanctions have been eased, partially but still eased, and Russia is beginning to grow economically. I see only advantages for Moscow because it does not care about human lives, especially when it comes to lives that are not Russian. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, in an interview with Axios.
Ukraine's operational and strategic capabilities to inflict increasing damage on Russia are causing serious concern even within the Russian ultranationalist community. Note analysts from the Institute for the Study of War. Failures in air defense, in other words, Moscow's simple inability to protect its key assets, are accompanied by setbacks at the front.
A well-known Russian ultranationalist military blogger complained that Russian troops will not be able to change the unfavorable situation on the battlefield in the coming months, and that Ukraine's rather successful counterattacks have undermined Russia's ability to conduct offensive operations in 2026, from the Institute for the Study of War report.
Europe must increase pressure on the aggressor country, said EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas.
Time and again, we see Ukraine demonstrating its desire for peace while Russia intensifies its attacks. And we understand that pressure must be put on the aggressor, not on the victim. There will be no lasting peace unless Russia is subjected to pressure. To put an end to this war, we must confront Moscow, not encourage it, not ease restrictions, but tighten them. The 20th package of sanctions is ready for approval, and we will tighten the noose even further, especially around Russia's shadow fleet.
But Brussels and Washington would be much stronger if they acted in coordination and put pressure on Russia together, noted Kaja Kallas. Karina Loloyan for Freedom TV channel.
The aggressor continues attempts to break through near Pokrovsk, Mirnograd and Hrishine, but units of the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces are delivering a strong counterattack. Over the past week, about 50 occupiers have been eliminated, dozens of pieces of equipment destroyed, and more than 800 drones taken down. Today, the main threat on the front line is unmanned aerial vehicles hunting both infantry and equipment. To survive, soldiers must not only take cover but also know how to counter them. How paratroopers are trained and what equipment our defenders receive. All this in the report ahead.
Currently, drones have become one of the key means of striking, both on our side and on the enemy's side.
Now, there are very few firefights where infantry fights against infantry. The most terrifying weapon we've come up with is FPV drones. They fly long distances and they can enter through very small windows. That is, it's very hard to hide from it. That's why it's necessary to learn and develop these skills of countering UAVs, because this is the main threat on the battlefield right now.
The fighters operate in different conditions, in open terrain, in tree lines, in cities. That's why all possible scenarios for countering drones are being practiced.
We plan tactics of action directly for a specific area, for example, in a trench or in an urban environment. Well, there are certain specifics. For example, in a trench, he has to, roughly speaking, stay alert and face the FPV drone. In an urban environment, for example, with a load-bearing wall, he can hear everything acoustically. The same goes for taking damage. That is, roughly speaking, the 12 gauge is now widely used to engage the enemy. There is also development in terms of ammunition for small arms, 55, 56, 72, and anti-drone rounds. This is also an aspect that is explained and demonstrated to soldiers regarding the use and application of these types of ammunition and weapons.
Constant practice allows you to act quickly and without mistakes during the most intense moments of an attack.
We must be prepared, and our skills must be honed to precision to respond effectively in any situation. The more you practice, the more everything becomes second nature to you. When you manage to shoot down a drone, you start to fear it less because you become confident in yourself. If you succeeded once, you'll succeed again next time.
Paratroopers are trained gradually, starting from simulators and moving on to working in conditions as close as possible to real combat.
Our first exercise is interactive. These are interactive simulators. The Fly Swatter is VR, immersion in VR goggles, virtual reality. The guys shoot just like in real combat. They have weapons, they're attacked by FPV drones, and they hit them. By using laser tag, we can choose any area of terrain. Like you saw, shooting from the bed of a pickup truck, the pickup just drives around the field. So we're not worried about any unauthorized shooting in the direction of, say, a populated area.
We had 5 attempts in the first exercise. Out of 5 attempts, I hit all of them. I had 0 hits as the pilot, but on the pickup, 4-1. 4-1.
In whose favor?
In my favor, in my favor.
In battle, there's no time to think. That's why every action is practiced until it becomes automatic.
We train muscle memory so that later they don't freeze up in stressful situations on the battlefield.
Combat training directly affects a soldier's morale and psychological state. If he sees an FPV drone and is confident in his actions, knowing he can counter it, he will counter it.
Paratroopers of the 25th Separate Airborne Brigade, together with other units of the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces, continue to hold back the enemy in the Pokrovsk direction, thwarting the occupiers' plans. And it is precisely these survival skills and counter-drone tactics that save the lives of Ukrainian soldiers every day. Anna Ruda, Alexander Dovhan reporting exclusively for Fakti ICTV, United News.
What do you think about the latest events? Share your opinion in the comments, like the video and subscribe to stay informed about the main headlines. See you soon!